if you could share, I guess, how you use your flock of six, I know, to go
Yeah, that's
ahead
right. That's
and
right.
just face this fear yourself.
The the book was born out
Mm,
of the worst experience of my life, right? And so
mhm,
in 2012, my oldest son Theo, at the time, was 14 years old and was diagnosed with this rare blood cancer and needed a bone marrow transplant in order to survive. And so that began like this 263-day harrowing experience, living in a hospital with him battling cancer.
mm,
And we, at one point during the treatment, we had this crossroads that we had come to where he had received the bone marrow transplant, but he developed something called graft versus host disease, which is sort of where the marrow that's inserted in your body doesn't recognize the environment that it's been placed. And so it begins to attack the body.
mhm,
And so the way that you treat it is you super suppress your body's immune system so that it won't fight back. So they did that. They did that. The highest level of it's called GVHD. The highest level of GVHD is deadly. It will kill you. And that's where he was. And so they suppressed his immune system. And when they did that, he contracted this deadly fungus while he was in the hospital that had the exact opposite treatment. So we had two things that were threatening his life with opposite treatments. And so, we get called one evening into the parents' lounge, and there's a row of doctors sitting in there, and they look at my wife and I, and they say, "We are so sorry, but there's nothing else we can do. No matter what we treat, the other's going to take his life, and we don't think he's going to make it through the night. So you should probably go back to the room and say your goodbyes and call whoever you need to call." And so, you when you are faced with that, um, and you have no idea what your non-negotiable values are, what do you base your decisions on? um, the truth for me was it's you base it on emotion, which is the absolute worst thing you could do in that moment. Our emotions are unstable and constantly change, and you can't make decisions with regards to life and death on something like emotions. You just can't. You have to be rooted in these non-negotiables to make a comfortable decision that you feel good about. But I didn't have those things defined in my life at that point. So I went back, grabbed my wife's hand. We walked back to the room. We sat on the edge of his bed, and I fumbled through my way of trying to find the words to say goodbye. And it was just the single most awful experience of my life. And up to that point of my 40, I don't know, it's 42, 43 years that I had been on the planet. And you know to make a long story short, what ended up happening was I called my younger brother who lived 1,500 miles away, told him he wasn't going to have time to make it. So he says his goodbyes over the phone as well. He's incredibly distraught. But that evening, he decides he's going to film himself sitting on his couch holding up these poster boards in this Hail Mary attempt to find a solution. And he basically sits there and says, my nephew's dying. We're running out of time. Here's what's happening. Here's what we've tried. Here's what, we're looking for. If you have any ideas, please help us. And overnight, that video received over 500,000 views. And by the next morning, I was receiving calls from people from all over the world who had um, ideas. And one of them happened to be a doctor at MD Anderson in Houston, and he was an expert on this fungus that was killing Theo. And so they sort of put their heads together. I got another call from Dr. Tim Johnson from Good Morning America. And he said, "You tell your doctor anybody he wants to speak to, just get me a list and I'll try to make it happen in the next 24 hours." So we did that, and we made a list of a doctor at Dana-Farber in Boston, and there was a research scientist at Cornell University, and sort of the four doctors put their heads together and came up with this batshit crazy plan to try to save Theo's life. And it worked. And so, Theo is now 23 years old. He is has conquered the cancer. He's dealing with other issues of all of the. Sometimes the cure is worse than the disease, and so he's dealing with some of that stuff now.
mhm,
But the point of the story and the reason that the book exists is because even though we had a fairy tale ending, which we know does not happen, living in a pediatric oncology ward for a year, um, I spent at least 5 years going to bed every night with one thought going through my head, which is, I wonder if he thinks I gave up on him. And it's a valid question, even though he never asked it. um, it took me years after that to finally basically say, you know what, I'm tired of winging it in my life. I really need to figure out what these non-negotiables are, so that if I'm ever faced with that sort of decision again, I can lean on these things that I know won't change. And no matter what the outcome is, I can feel good that I made the best decision I could in that moment. And and that's why I wrote the book, is because I feel like most of us are where I was. They just haven't had the unfortunate situation to sit on the edge of a bed and say goodbye to a child. I don't want them to ever have to experience that. But if they find themselves in some sort of incredibly difficult crossroads, what I want them to do is to be able to go, here are the 5 things that I need to honor. And as long as I honor those things, I've done my job. But when you don't have those things defined, you're going to flail and swirl and get caught up in an emotional tornado. And I promise you, you're going to beat the hell out of yourself for years, because you will make bad decisions, just like I did. And so that's where the book came from. It's why I'm so passionate about it. I've devoted the rest of my life to making sure people discover these things, whether that's for your personal development or professional development, whether it's at home or at work, it doesn't matter. These are the literal rules that you should live your life by. And so that, to me, is my life's mission at this point, is to make sure people discover their flock.